Okay, starting out with just giving many of you may know these things, but this is India at a glance. Just sort of letting you remind yourselves of where it sits in the globe. And it's the seventh largest country, second in population. There are estimates that by 2050, India will overtake the economies of the U.S. and be second only to China. There are more than 20 languages spoken in India, but Hindi and English are two of the official languages. There certainly is a very diverse religious culture and tolerance. And of course, all of you know from your history days and the British rule and the Gandhi-led revolutions. There are many, obviously, European and English traditions. So many of the institutions are very similar in the infrastructure set up to things that we're more familiar with. And a lot of people refer to it as the largest democracy in the world. This is an estimate of increase over on the right of the percentage of GDP that to double the percentage of money spent on R&D as a percentage of GDP is expected to double in the next few years. And government's expected to increase spending on higher education by 30%. Similar to what Adrian was talking about as far as the number of institutions, there are a huge number, 1,000 institutions, and 6 are planned just in the next few years. So there's just huge amounts of growth. There's 17 million students, and 16% in higher education are studying in the sciences. At the same time, there are a lot of challenges. 34% of the university positions, the faculty positions, are vacant. There's a lot of trouble keeping the PhDs that are trained, for instance, in the U.S. to stay in China because of the opportunities elsewhere in the world, and also because there are a lot of businesses that will pay more than being in academic circles. But 8% of the population, of a huge population, does have a master's or doctorate, and that is higher than Japan, France, Germany, and Brazil at the moment. So there is obviously a huge push toward educating of people in the sciences. Here is another slide that gives you a comparison of different regions of research expenditures, which obviously, as everyone knows here, leads to greater output. And so China's growth from 96 to 2007 has been 22%. And then I think this was, I wanted to include this slide because I thought it was interesting for other countries to look at. I mean, many of you know this again because of where your submissions are coming from. But looking at the growth in Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. South Korea especially because they're not coming from as low a number. So, you know, some of these look falsely inflated because the percentage growth is off a much lower number. But South Korea is definitely one to watch as well for creating greater sales efforts and outreach to authors. India has been growing at 9%, and then you can see the lower growth rates of the EU, US, and Japan. Some of what I'm providing for you today I think will be useful as you're building your markets in India as resources to start with. So these are major funding agencies, major government funding agencies. I think this is important whether you publish subscription journals or open access journals as to where the funding is coming from. Most of the time I'll spend talking about the subscriber universe. And this is a sort of compilation of information that we received in talking directly with librarians and consortia, but also talking to two of the major agents who have been obviously working for 40, 50 years in the region and gave us a lot of this information that we were able to sort of verify because, as you know, sometimes it's difficult to get data that's really accurate, especially from emerging economies. But historically, there has been very little access to international journals in India, and that institutions really only held maybe across all of the major institutions in India, 2,500 journals total out of the 20 to 50,000, depending on how you're counting, scholarly journals in the world. And a typical university would subscribe to fewer than 200 journals, and many subscribe to fewer than 100. Today, the estimate of the academic journals market is $175 million. And just as you'd expect, most of that is spent on electronic resources. But there really has been, especially because of publishers, combining print and online, there still is a print market and that's been about 60%. That's obviously changing more toward electronic. And the factors that have been improving access to the journals that you publish and others is the number of new institutions and focus in consortia. So that is a huge, just like in China, it's a huge area for growth and a way to make greater inroads into the Indian market. And so the factors in consortia formation have been to enlarge the resources that they're able to purchase and provide to their patrons, and to hold, and to hold down the escalating cost of journals, as is the goal for most consortia, and then to allow more sharing across institutions. This is a list of the types of institutions that there are that subscribe, and it gives you an idea of there being, roughly equals 1,000 institutions. I think this, for most publishers, will be a very important slide. These are really the consortia that are the major consortia in India, and it gives you an idea of the acronym, what it stands for, and then the areas of concentration. And very easily, really frankly, for Google searching, if you want to go more in depth as to what their areas, and they really are all accessible on the web in English, and so you can approach this. And when Karen talks, she'll be able to give more information about what it's like to negotiate with them. But I thought I would go through just a sampling of them because I thought it was very interesting, and one of the questions we get asked most often with publishers is what kind of discount is needed. And so I thought we actually had spoken to each of these consortia coordinators, and it would be useful. We talked to a lot more than this, but these are some highlights of the larger ones. So just going over this quickly, this is a pure sciences, social sciences, and humanities consortia that they focus quite broadly, started by India's president. And they expect discounts of 80 to 90%. And from what we understand, that is being provided by the larger publishers. They understand that societies, often with a smaller portfolio, cannot offer and shouldn't be expected to offer that kind of discount. And as Adrian said, it is tricky because what will happen, how difficult will it be to raise prices over time? But just so you know, this is what they're expecting. It's another one that's in the applied basic sciences, engineering, management, technology area, and their discounts range quite broadly. So very difficult to figure out what to do, from 12% to 95%, but their average is 80%. And here's a life sciences publisher, and they're expecting, again, an 80 to 85% discount. So obviously deeper discounts required in India than in North America and Europe. And the two agents that are the major agents in India, those were the ranges that they gave us, expecting a 20 to 80% discount. Agent 1 and the Agent 2 gave us expect a 30 to 50% discount. Large publishers, you must have an impact factor. It doesn't have to necessarily be high, which is kind of interesting. They don't have a lot of sophistication yet about impact factor. But as long as you have one, you'll be considered. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity to be first in and be able to get a lot of exposure. And large publishers, as I mentioned, often give the deepest discounts due to economy of scale. But they understand as you educate them. So working with them, trying to have a dialogue like is true with any of your institutional deals is just very important, to be open to understanding. And at least has been my experience is working with any libraries. If you explain what your approach is and you're very transparent and you talk about the difficulties and what your pricing is and what your pricing is relative to others, you can explain where you're able to offer margins or that you already have a very low price. And there's a lot of ways if you have more of an open dialogue, I think you can have a lot of success. And this is a group of the major sales agents in India. And I know a lot of publishers that have worked with every one of these groups and have had a lot of success with any one of them. And then just to summarize, there is definitely greater purchasing through consortia than there ever has been, which makes it a lot easier to enter the marketplace in a lot of ways. And that we heard over and over again from the consortia directors, because we were a group of, I was representing a group of smaller publishers. They're very sympathetic to how difficult it is to compete, just like it is in the U.S. against the big deal versus the smaller publishing. But they're recognizing that, so that does give an opportunity, I think, to work with them. They also are talking a lot about how many of the large publishers, large societies and large commercial and university press publishers, are offering many more workshops and seminars to authors, which are really helping, and then to the librarians, obviously are helping set those up. And that is giving a lot of publicity to those groups. So if you're able, or you can combine with either sales groups or can choose some of those and create more of a public relations presence, that was valued by the consortia coordinators. There also is, and this is a very interesting thought too. I remember I did a seminar pretty recently for a group of Canadian publishers. And one of the questions that we thought of is, well, what happens if China or India or Brazil, they all decide that they want to publish only in their own national journals? And there is a great appeal, and you can understand it. I mean, how many American societies do we have? And, you can understand the sort of nationalistic pride that there is. And so there is a great interest among Indian authors in publishing in their own journals, but also in foreign journals because of the higher impact factors. But you definitely are competing against, and most of the major publishers have recognized that and have purchased Indian journals. And so, forming alliances is another way for you to make more roads. Okay, Tim. And then the last is that the shift to value-based pricing models. They're definitely looking at usage, very much as we're familiar with in the U.S. Library demands are that all exactly the same as we feel with librarians here: competitive, fair, transparent, and the contract issues are exactly the same ones that we're all used to facing, which is pricing structure, archival issues, fair use, transparency, and where the governing laws are. So those are all very familiar things. So in a lot of ways, it's not different than here. The discounting, I think, is the major difference. So thank you very much. And now Brazil. Thanks, David.
Thanks.